Okay, ancient pictographs and ideograms. It's ancient languages before they really had a full writing and sentences and things going on, that each letter quite often would be a picture, and quite often that picture could be a compound and actually mean a whole lot more. I give you an example. Stick man is man. Stick man with a spear is hunter. See how that becomes complex? Stick man with a hunter with a, let's say, a cow or a bull near him becomes really the hunter. And so you can get a whole complex idea, or hunting, or complex ideas out of slightly complex ideograms. And so we're looking here at old languages, and the top of it here will show you. Hopefully you'll be able to see good enough. I tried to get it squinched in there as good as possible. Hopefully, and it can blow it up as big as you can here. But the first two categories over here are Egyptian, which is the ancient, and the more modern, where it became hieroglyphic. Okay, and then you have Phoenician, right? And ancient Phoenician is the whole area around there in the Levant and so on, that ends up being taken over by the Hebrews later and so on. We'll get there. And then this category over here is Latin. And this is Hebrew right here at the very end. And we try to get a correlation between people. And one easy way to do it is from languages, and you can see common shapes and letters and things like that. And you can kind of realize that they have common pulls and draws, ancestry, things like that. So oddly enough, right here at the very start, I don't know if you can see it in the top left, but there's the eagle, and there is the eagle, and it is the gull, or the sea fish, of Ea, and Ea is Enki, and Enki used to be the old name for Neptune of the Sumerians, and he was the water god. And so, of course, a gull is a water bird, and seagulls and fish eagles, and so on, people. And eagles fish. Even up in Alaska, what do? They fish. They grab fish right straight out of the water, pick them up, hold them parallel to themselves, and go with it. And anyhow, so the odd thing here is that the other ideogram that used to be before that, for that same animal, is the snake. And if you can see right next to it, that's real telling, because here we have right in front of us the separation of Egypt, perhaps the higher and lower, the old school, the new school, the breaking of Egypt, and the snake and the eagle, and how that went wrong and tore up the once great empire of Egypt. And it's written there. But worse than that, there's a story of a snake and an eagle that goes back to primordial times, back before Sumeria, and in fact you even find it in South America and stuff, and the eagle and the snake. And it's I've got a video on it. But if you look at Phoenician, Phoenicians put the next cube over there is a triangle. And so that triangle is equating it to, well, the Phoenician people are talking about the pyramid people. And you don't have the snakes and the eagle pictures. And so there's a triangle. And that's an A. If you look at Greek, it becomes RA. And then into Latin, it really gets defined into an A. And then all the way over to Hebrew, it turns into the thing that looks kind of like an N, whereas a Aleph. But if you look at Latin and the third letter over, right there, how it looks very much like that if you just kind of drew a little line across the bottom and didn't make such a tail on the back right side, top right side. Anyhow, let's get through some of this, because there's a lot of information that you can find through here, and I've got a big reveal I want to do for you all here. So try to stick with me if you can, and we'll learn something about ancient pictures. So you can see the next line down where it's a crane, and then that picture is a different type of bird, and how it looks like a squatting person, almost like a praying thing. And then you can see this weird little bird head, and then because of bird head and B, that you end up getting and it goes all the way across, and then that ends up looking, I don't know, somewhat like a bird head. Over here in the Hebrews, throne ends up showing up to be a thing that actually looks like an altar, and then it's with perhaps even a fire into it, number 3 down, if you're looking right over here. And so even the next thing over, the ancient one, also looks almost like a fire with the 3 little dots below it and the Z going above it, and this hook and this arc that comes over and everything. and it is known as Ka. And then you find that's ABC, that's C, and it's the C letter for Hebrew, and it gives you a C sound. Wow, that's amazing how that all goes together. Okay, the hand, and then there's the next one, and it shows you a picture of a hand, but then the next one almost looks like a mouse. And then you see triangles also. In fact, in the Greek, it's definitely a triangle right there in the very middle of it, but that gets flipped on its edge, becomes the D, and you see the D come all the way out to the end of it. Meander, the idea of being lost or meandering, is first seen as a maze, and then shown as being three ways to go, but which choice do you make? And this forked idea that runs around in circles and becomes RE. You can see that all happening correctly, right? Yeah. Cerastes was an old word for a snake or the dragon itself, and Cerastes is your next number 6, the line there, and it looks like a little snake which has a little prong on his head. I guess that's the more dragon effect, and then or serpent. And then you have the Y that looks like a snake with that little head that turns into a YYY. Oddly enough, that freaks out right in the middle of Greek and becomes an F, and in Latin it becomes an F and becomes the letter F and is the letter F in Hebrew. But at one time it was a Y, and the snake was a Y. And that's weird because Hebrew, just one little weird interjection, and you know, all these little things people can make up and throw into things, but you know how Hebrew lost the IEY situation and decided to go with J. And it could have something to do with this snake ideogram and its Y origins. But next, let's go with duck. So you look at this duck, and it looks like a duck. And its next picture over there, though, really looks like the symbol of Saturn that you see. And it's a duck. And then you see these two separations that look almost like an I. And then as you go through it all, it ends up being Z's. It turns from the I into a Z. And that makes you wonder how that all correlated. Well, ancient Gnostic writings say that people used to worship birds a whole lot, and one symbol that got carried along through was the duck symbol, continuing to be something that was associated with Z. And what is that? Well, there was the Anzu bird. And so what's the Anzu bird? Well, if you find out Sumerian stuff, there's Anzu bird, and An was the god of all, and then Zu was a bad guy, and Anzu was somebody that actually did something a little bad, stole all the me's of creation, and then they got him back from him and did some things anyhow. And so a swan, kind of has this look like that, and that really, if you put the bottom on it there that I couldn't do in the picture, kind of looks like a Z, so I always do these little bird heads, and if I was to try to make a swan on a wall, you're really making a Z out of your arm, right? And this is where it comes from. And there's ancient sign language that goes with all this too, that's with letters that people could do to each other. It's one way that you could speak in tongues to different people of dialects, but I don't want to digress too much, but that becomes your I. And the idea of this is that in ancient bird worship, one of the reasons for worship is that ducks would go and fly south for the winter and come back, and they were a sign of the seasons before anybody figured out what really time was and seasons and how it all worked. And the people that originally understood it all of a sudden goes back to Babylonian Sumeria, where she had pigeons and she had raised those, and swans and ducks and geese, and she was known as Mother Goose, and she's the mother of all and all this type of thing. And she's the one with the angel worship and stuff, and you're like, no, she didn't have the angels, it was the Hebrew. Well, why is this guy referring to the angels being there? Well, oddly enough, you look at the Sumerian depictions, and the people all have wings and all this stuff. And in the ancient tale of Gilgamesh, whenever he dies, he turns into bird-winged type people and you're like, oh, okay, so they had something like that too. Then you find out theirs predates the Hebrew tale by a large amount of time, and that Abraham came from the land of Ur, and it would have been a story he grew up with, and it all of a sudden gets extremely conspicuous. And yeah, so ancient symbols with Abraham and things falls in here real shortly too, and then I'll start trying to tie together this reveal. But so this duck would go south for the winter, north for the winter, and the reason it looks like an I out there for the next 3 or 4 before it turns into a Z is because it was the creature that could go from the north firmament to the south firmament, and that was weird. So I tried to look into it, and firmament in this one idea was ice. And that made me think, hey, whenever they separate the waters, the upper waters from the lower waters, this is really just the ice age melting away, separating away, and it has nothing to do with water going above and water being above a dome. Or at least we could understand that now. They misunderstood it, and all these primordial people, including the Hebrews, had the idea that we lived in a snow globe that was a flat earth, and that the moon and stars and everything were trapped inside of this crystal dome that was above us, and the bubbles in the crystal were actually the stars, and they were the angels looking over us, and the moving stars that were up there, the wandering stars, were gods. And everybody knows this about the Greeks and everything else. Well, come to find out, it's attached to everybody back in the time whenever they were figuring it out. But some people knew that it was something given by God as a way to find the seasons, Sumerians, it seems, and even though they named their primordial gods after it. And so the other people that apparently came after this started doing the same, but revering people instead, and that was the travesty that was the problem that had happened all along. And they always blame it on a woman, and it could be because of the Queen Inanna Ninharsag worship that ended up happening out of the Whore of Babylon situation and the Queen of Heaven. But I digress a little bit, but there's some attachment good for you. So the next one down is a sieve. And ironically, it looks like a bowl. And so we got it there, sieve, and it looks like a bowl in the Egyptians. And then it's a swirl that almost looks like a bowl and kind of an and sign kind of thingy. But then it's also squared off all through the middle part here. You wonder what that is. And later it looks squared off, but H-y in between. Well, it's the sieve that you would put, and a mesh you could put on ores and things like that and try to sieve for gold and sieve out minerals and jewels and gemstones and things, and there's your sieve. And it becomes the H, and because it makes a sound. So a lot of this is attached to a lot of just primordial, old things. Tongs that are the next one down is neat. And you see how they almost look like tongs is the very first thing. And then it looks kind of funny like a bird head, but that really is like a pincher tong with a point. But then all of a sudden they change. And they are crosses and X's. And then there's a circle with a dot. And then there's a half junction that kind of looks like that Earth look that we were talking about, where it's a dome above and a dome below. The next symbol over, though, ironically, is the same symbol for like Saturn, actually. And it looks kind of like Saturn with the ring around it before they ever even really knew. Next over in that is an X. Well, you're looking at the words tongs, but tongs, another word for tongs, see, tongs is actually like an Asian word for it, like hibachi, and the other word is tines. So you look at the X's that are over here, and you know how we multiply things, not tines, but times, and X is a multiplier, and so we use the same style, either a dot or a circle, or even the X over there that's a circle and a dot for a times symbol. But this also right here was another symbol of Saturn, or Chronos. And the crossing of things that changed, right? It's also a symbol of the 4 seasons and all kinds of things. And the reason they used it for Saturn's things is that he was the god of the seasons and harvest. And so here's your 4 seasons, and things. And so it gets equated with him real quickly. But I diverse, but I'll get back to Saturn. Parallels, the next one down is 2 parallel lines, but it looks kind of like a Y thing. That's weird. And then there's zigzag lines. It comes a straight line, I, and it becomes J and I. But also in your Hebrew, I and Ayud and J, which J comes out of that. And so there's your J. And Yahweh could actually be Yahweh, and Jesus could actually be Jesus. So anyhow, we ironically, Jawa, Jawa, is that God's name? Okay, well, it could be because of the IJY situation, but I digress. The next thing is a bowl, and it looks like a bowl. And then the next thing looks like a little ladle, and that's a dipper, and that's because of the zodiac and the big major dipper that goes on. But then we find that they all of a sudden look like sparks and a K that's backwards, and then a K, KKK, and it goes all the way through. And you find that the original word for a bowl was not a bowl. A bowl is a shape. The original word for a bowl was like cup. And it's where we get our word cup from. But then also you find words like crucible and container and all these things that are shaped like that aren't shaped in a perfect dish. And so we come up with Latin and modern words that are dishes and bowls. Lioness is real telling. This lioness right here. Let me see if I can just use this. Hopefully you'll be able to tell this. There's lioness. And lioness originally almost looks like a swan kind of thing, and that's weird. So it's the lady lion was the swan. You see this, right? And so it turns into what looks like a jagged L or a V. It turns upside down in Greek there real quick. You know, if there for a while they had upside down letters, almost looks like it's some Soviet Union stuff. And boom, here we go over into L's, and that's L. And so you get a lioness is L. Well, that's odd. L would be the lion. El is the god of the Canaanites. El, you know, it's El, who's equated to Saturn. You know, and Saturn is named that because they deify him and they put the Ur on there, and they know that it has something to do with Babylonian and Ur. And then you have the fact that they're called satyrs in that area by the Greeks and Romans. You know, satyrs, that's down in that area in the Levant. They say that they have goat feet. Of course, we've never found anybody with goat feet and little horns on them, but I think it was mocking them because they had already made fabrics, and those people were still wearing goat skins and animals, and they truly were goat herders. In fact, look in the Bible, they're goat herders, wearing a lot of skins. And so here's your depiction of a satyr wearing goat horns and so on, that gets passed on. And that's Saturn. And so you have days that are dedicated to the week, to the major gods of the world, and Saturday is named after Saturn. And, oh, isn't that the original day of Hebrew worship all the way till Rome changed it later to change it to Sunday, some pagan thing? So really they worship Satyr too. And who's Satyr? Well, that's El, the Canaanite god I was just talking about. He has a son named Baal. Baal was a lightning god or a storm god, and he controlled lightning. He threw lightning bolts. So Chronos was a Phoenician, Chronos the Phoenician, and El. And then that's also Saturn. And his son, Baal, was a lightning god, and Saturn's son was Zeus, the one that came back and avenged, and he was a lightning god and took over. So that puts that all together. So you look at water, the next line down. Oh, I'm sorry, we're on Owl, and Owl's pretty cool too. Look at Owl, and whenever you get to Owl, there's a wiggle after that. Looks like an M on its side. Then you have a W with a line. This is where wisdom comes from. In fact, if you go all the way over to the first on the Latin, it has a W effect, not an M. Okay? But it's an owl. And this is almost like a bird wings. Imagine the picture up there of the W. It's a bird with his wings, like you draw when you're kids somehow, and then swooping down. That's what owls do. So they come down and, phew, boy, they get that mouse. Later it's changed into an M, and that M that you see all the way across there looks like bird wings you draw in little pictures where you're drawing them out in the sunset, and it's just really an M in the sunset, a couple of M's and a couple of kind of V-ish W's, and yeah, you made a couple of birds in the sunset. You know what I'm talking about. Water's the next one down, and it looks like water. Then it goes way off, and then all of a sudden it becomes zigzags, looks like lightning again. And of course the lightning and thunder is involved with thunderstorms. Thunderstorms bring rain. There's where your water comes from. And so they're all worshiping these storm gods at one time, and that lightning bolt turns over into an N. And so first they look like a lightning bolt, and then they turn into an N on its side. Of course, he gets overturned back, and then so now it ends up being an N, and now we're on our N's. You see this, right? There's a thing with the whole Hebrew deal, but I'm not going to attach it. It would make this too long. Chair backs are just lines and vents, lines and vents. It's kind of weird. Then it looks like the back of a chair anyhow that's a box. And then you have an X that's on there. And it really meant chair back. And at one time, a Latin thing actually had a chair back as being a cross. And then people say, well, that had to do with Jesus who was nailed on the cross. Anyhow, so the idea of dot, 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 or time in some situations were circles. And Saturn had the X and the line through it. And so they took and put that as the full symbol of time. And you get this hourglass effect where it's a broken circle. And that's also looked at as being an ancient sign of infinity. I'll show you that here in just a second. But now we have shutters that somehow look like hooks with barbs on them that are hooks that shutters lock things. A shutter will come in and latch. And you see these latching effects, and that's a P. And a P is like on your gate, where you pull the gate to on your house, and then you put the little bar through the shape of the P. You put it through there. Snakes look like a snake. It's a snake, but then the snake is the opposite of the owl. And there's a whole iconography of the owl and the snake instead of the eagle and the snake being the same type thing. And the wings and the letters. It comes through, but it sure enough turns into an S, but that is a Y in Hebrew, where the snake is the Y, Yahweh. And angles, angles, end up being suns that are sunsetting and the rays cutting at an angle. I don't know if you can really get that idea, but this is like a sun setting and then the rays of the sun. This is the sun showing lines and lines and lines. But of course, you could easily misunderstand a few of these and say, here's God, he's got a line through him, and whenever he comes down to the world, and there he is, and he's an angel, right? People can get screwed up real quick reading in other people's language and trying to figure it out when you don't know what the hell you're doing. You know, like, I don't know, Joseph Smith or something. Probably just lost the Mormons right there. Mouth. Because now look at what they found over that Mormon stuff and what he had actually transposed. The ones that they do have that he even said were transposed. Anyhow, I'm not going to go into that. Mouth looks like that, and then looks like a person talking or a bird chirping. Mouth, B, it's a beak, it's a P coming out there. It's all going on. So then you have a symbol, an ancient one of inundated gardens, and it really looks like rain or plants growing up at different heights. This is controlled by this, and W, water. Here's rain and water symboling coming down, symbolizing water. Get that all the way through, and that ends up looking like the Hebrew symbol, which really looks like the original stolen W from Egypt. One more thing in here, lassos have a symbolism that really is a loop, which is a loop that's broken, but then its other symbol here is a cross. Phoenician symbol that I guess the Canaanites and so on, the lasso, the way to ensnare somebody had something to do with the cross symbol. And that became our T all the way through. But the first Latin symbolization really does look like the symbol of Saturn. Now I showed you I was going to do a planet thing real quick before I end this and give you another reveal. And so let's look at the other symbolism page that they've got. Where is it? And I know this is going to be blurry somewhat, but whoop, really? There we go. So you look at ancient symbols of like the triple goddess that's up here, and it's really a moon crescent one way, a full moon and a moon crescent the other way. This is the time when they worship the moon god, Sin, and his daughter Inanna. The horn god is the same thing, and if you look at the Lord of Shadows, it's really just dark and light version. And the old crone is really the triple moon goddess, ta-da, turned into the old crone, ta-da. Pentagrams are a star meaning Venus, and Venus, whenever it does its wobble through the sky, will actually, like a spirograph, make this star pattern that really comes and does ching, 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 ching. Over time, it does this thing as it does its precession that really looks like a star that we draw, exactly like that. In fact, symmetrical and everything, so they put that on that. But the pinnacle is whenever that's trapped by that circle. And that circle is symbolized by the guy that's the four quad elements of the year. And here's the old ancient symbol of time. And the reveal I was going to tell you is that St. Quinethon in 300, he talks about Berosus and all the other guys, and they all talk about each other's stuff, but some of them are pretty critical of all these religions and what they believe. And one of the key things that he said was that the ancient symbol for Abraham was the same symbol for time, and that they knew that the Hebrews had stolen that idea because they're trying to equate him back to Chronos, their original god, whenever they wrote it in scribble scratch. And that they also did the same thing for Jacob, and it was hard to tell the difference between Jacob because Israel would have been that same symbolism. And the way to tell it the difference is whenever it was Jacob, it was this symbol, and whenever it was the Israel symbol, it was the symbol of Saturn. Saturn, right? And let's see if I can show you anything else out of here too. Well, the planets used to go in order, and this is the way they were written. But before they knew that we were right here, they thought we were the starting of everything on the left, but we were right here after Mars. And so Jupiter, if you look, looks like a 4, but we're that. So what happens is they take and knock us out right here and push everything down. Neptune, the god of the sea, gets scooted down. And what does Saturn look like? Here's that duck again. That's funny how that goes together with the old duck thing. So what's the other big reveal I can give you? Well, the ancient symbol for what they wrote down for Israel was Saturn. That's odd. And then another one of these Berosus guys here likes to spit out the idea that the ancient Phoenician word for the wandering star that we know today as Saturn, the ancient Phoenician word for that star was EziekiEL. And it's written down in old literature and Greek stuff that's kept here. It's not something that somebody tried to write and come up with and retransfer something. It's written down in their words. And it lets you know that every time in the Bible when it says Israel, that they're actually talking about Saturn. And Saturn is Satyr, and Satyr is that goat god. And who's the goat god? And you come to find out that SaturnEL said that he was above God and did all this stuff and everything, and that he was a god, and then they turned him into one. That's wicked. And they act like there's only one God in the Bible, but they sure do worship Abraham and Jacob and all this stuff as being the forefathers, very much like the Romans did their own pantheon, and the hottest one was the hottest one, Zeus, for a good long while. Remember, he gets busted down. Well, Baal worship involved child sacrifice, and they had this demon-looking thing that looks like off some old devil-worshipping rock and roll album cover where they throw the baby into the fire. That's where they got all that from whenever they would look into their stuff to try to find satanic music crap. We sure did back in the 80s. And Dio, and everybody thought Ozzy Osbourne and all this stuff. He was actually just singing about shit that was found through the Bible, believe it or not. Who was telling them this? It's Satan worship. None of this stuff came from Satan worship. It was all old stuff that went into the Bible, but I digress. So Israel, anytime you see that, that's actually Saturn. And the other reveal here, Persian people called Saturn Kivan or Kiwan, and to this day they still do. Now, the Arabic form of that, they called, by the Saturn war name, Chaldeans called him Stur, and that's like a star, and he was a wandering star, and the female Venus star was Ishtar, so you get all these star. That's where we get star from. By the way, look up my deal on Easter, which has to do with stir, and Ea, and Istar, and a whole nother thing that involves bunnies and eggs and stuff. But in spring, in ancient rites of spring, and where all that comes from. But this here, so stir and Arabic they would call Saturn Shaitan, Shaitan, I believe is the way that you would spell it. And because Arabic and Hebrew has a sh sound on their S, like Shamash is known as Kamash or Shamash, right? So it's got that H. There's a lot of, most of it has H. Hashem. They're Shemitic people. The word we look at today is Semitic, but they come from Shem. They're Shemitic people, right? So they had an SH. So we take the H off now. And so if you take the H off of the Arabic form of that, that becomes Satan. And that's where a vision of Satan and where we get it from, and this half goat guy, is this idea of Saturn and the God that was supposedly against the Hebrews, the adversary that was against him. They came in and tried to kill off, they were wandering nomadic tent people, and they wanted to steal a town. And so in stealing of the town, they had to cause genocide against somebody, and their great adversary was them. And the god El, and Baal was the storm god. And you see in the Bible where he shows up in lightning and coming around doing all that stuff, and that's when they were worshiping Baal. And they talk about the horns of the altar. And if you look up, Moses had horns. You'll see pictures. Google image Moses with, and horns will be the first thing that shows up. And look at some pictures of all the ancients, because it says when Moses came down from Sinai after meeting this entity that he had horns. Kind of weird how he was mad because the bull was there, because that was a symbol of him. Right after that, he tells them one of the things they have to do is rub the blood that they do of the sacrifice on the horns of the altar. There we go again. So how is it that he doesn't want an altar with horns on it? And he calls it, anyhow, it's a complicated story that's been twisted by the Romans, believe it or not, and Greeks, trying to turn it into the religion we look at today. That's probably in another reveal, but I think I revealed enough here right in this, just off looking at a few old pictures and telling you about what their meanings were in the first place. And there's more to what's going on in front of me right here with the earth elements, the sun, the moon, its arcs, its angles, how those crescents end up being the Muslim star because it has to do with the moon god's sin, and then Venus, the star, and how they came together and made a triad. And there's a lot to this ancient stuff that got twisted around and today doesn't even seem to be quite what it originally meant. And like a lot of these symbols, it doesn't quite originally mean, or it doesn't quite now mean what it originally meant. Like it if you like it, people, and if you don't like it, I'm sorry. And subscribe if you want to, and look at some of my other videos on it. I'd look at the white elephant in the Bible, and it'll connect the L and to everything. Because let me just throw it in here, and then that will show you a lot whenever you go to it. But El is the god of the Canaanites, and if you don't think they were really worshiping him and you're still rejecting the idea, well, they call them the angels, and their names are EziekiEL and Ariel and Gabriel and Michael, which is Michael. The prophets are ELisha. God is named El Elyon, El Olam, El this. Well, what is El? El is God, and it's God the Most High. God this. What is El? El is the name of God. Oh. Bethel is the house of God, where Beth is house and El is God. That's weird. They'll just all eat up with it, isn't it? Yeah, it's still all in there. They can't get away from all of it. EziekiEL, NathaniEL. How about they worship in a tempEL or a chappEL that has a steep L on top of it? Baal has lightning or L, electricity. It gets pretty complicated, but it's really not that complicated. It gets pretty transparent once you've studied this stuff for a while. And yeah, like it if you like it. Check out some of my other videos. Saturn, Chronus, L. It'll lead you down a path if you're looking for that.